So welcome to our Creative Conversations podcast series, where we talk about creativity in art and in business in order to inspire your own creative thinking potential. So this is a partnership between the career and culture company, the Brimful Life, and also No Studios, Milwaukee's organization or membership club for artists and creatives. So we are broadcasting live from the Fall X Festival here in the Wisconsin Center. I am your host, Beth Ridley, and I wasn't lying when I said I saved the big guns for last, like the heavy hitters for last. I'm super excited about this conversation that we're going to have, and let's get to it. All right, so my two esteemed guests here are Ian McCullough, who is a musician, music producer, and computer engineer.
Yep.
Fair?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, awesome. And then also Chris Messina. So unless you've been living under a rock, you know that this guy invented the hashtag. And if you don't believe me, you should have been at his main stage presentation. And we also filmed it, and you can also Google it. So true facts. Facts.
Facts. Hashtag facts.
Facts. All right, so you guys have like a lot in common, and we'll get to that. But one thing that you do have in common is you're both open source advocates. So we're going to get to that in a little bit. But first, you guys have such interesting, diverse interests and backgrounds that really weave together in your work. I think my little, one or two word bio didn't do you guys justice. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to explain like what you do or how you explain what you do. And Chris, let's start with you first, because during your main stage, what I love is that you really said no matter what you do, you really have to start with your own definition of success. Not what other people expect of you, but to find that definition for yourself and really tap into your why, right? So let's just say, like, inventing the hashtag as an example of one thing that you've done. What was your why? What was your definition of success for going down taking that journey?
Yeah, it's funny.
Wait. Sorry, Jim. I said, look, everything is good until Jeff says something, and then Jeff said something. It's just that he's in awe. And
this is what I said, right?
Yeah.
Like, they Google it and they're like, what? Yeah. How does that even?
Okay, back to the show. Go on.
I mean, it's like, inventing the seatbelt or something. You're just like, how does that happen? Well, yeah, I guess like what I wanted to say about it, though, is that it hasn't always been clear to me that following my own why or setting my own definition of success was something that I could or should do.
Yeah.
I think the only reason why I came to that conclusion was by following other people's types of success for so long and not being very good at it, and realizing that most of the things that I'd done that had the most impact were things where I was doing it because of what I wanted to do or what I wanted to see in the world. And so, with the hashtag in particular, and with Barcamp and with co-working and some of these ideas that I think of as either behavioral technology or social technologies, the idea was to sort of, I'm this strange person that has always struggled, I think, to like fit in socially. And so at a young age, I learned to adapt myself to my social environments, which meant that I observed people a lot. And I observed what they said and what they talked about, and also how they behaved. So the behavior told me more about what they were trying to do than what they would say. And with things like, Barcamp or co-working, it was like observing how people wanted to come together, but they sort of like said, well, I could go to a conference or things like that. I'm like, well, what if we built this for ourselves? And like, what is it that we would want to do in this kind of space? And, you complain so much about going to a conference or whatever, and it's lame or something. I'm not talking like this about, but like conferences back in 2005, 6 or whatever, they're like corporate events you have to get all dressed up for. They're super formal, they're not a lot of fun, and people spend a lot of time like in the lobby. It's like, well, if you made the lobby part of the experience like the primary part of the conference, maybe that's more fun. And so if you design an event around that, then suddenly people are having the experience that they want, and they're not having to like pretend to do something else. So yeah. I think in so many ways for me, it was like realizing that I was sort of putting on other people's clothes to like, succeed in the way that they were describing success looked like. And I was like, that's not really my jam.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in Silicon Valley, I think that they go to Silicon Valley to make money, but really they want to connect to other people who are excited about the future, excited about product, excited about their passions, and want to unlock that. And ideally, one of the reasons why we need to like make money is to like be able to feed ourselves with calories, because that's what humans run on. And so that's sort of like an auxiliary thing of like
Right.
following your passion.
Yeah.
So it's just been a matter of kind of aligning myself closer and closer to what I actually do,
Yeah.
observing my own behavior and saying, oh, that's actually what I want to do, as opposed to these other things
Yeah.
that I think I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, that's great. And if only more people would have that courage or that confidence to really just sort of like do what they want versus what other people are expected, or just follow what has always been done before. Think of all the innovation and creativity, right? Because if you're sensing that, oh, this isn't right, there could be a better way, I'm sure a lot of other people are thinking that as well and could benefit from it. But for whatever reason, it takes a lot of courage. And as Ian know, I have a podcast where I interview a lot of people, adults, usually later in life, who get so fed up with the career that they're in because it was not really the career that they wanted, and they have to make bold and really big steps in order to course correct that. And so, but I do appreciate the fact that you said that you weren't like wired that way, that you had to work through that. That was your own journey. I think a lot of people can relate to that. So if anybody's listening who can get some courage to kind of like go for it, and I think if you're really passionate and authentic about it,
I mean, a lot
something
of it is
good will
like,
happen in the end.
I mean, I keep forgetting like how much people still drive their own cars if they do, because like we're on the verge of autonomous vehicles. But like, if you've ever driven like stick, it's sort of like, keeping yourself in like first gear and never getting like out of that. And that's what it felt like most of my career was like. And so once I realized that I had these other capacities, these other abilities, but that they weren't aligned with the kind of corporate structures that existed, because they weren't made for me. I went through the same school system that everyone else did. I went through public school, but I was also in first gear doing all that. So the more that I think what you're saying is you can identify the ways in which you feel some discomfort. The way that you can like become mindful of it and tune into it and sort of recognize what it is that like, your gut is telling you and then respond to it, the more likely you might be able to come up with something like really great that actually unlocks what you want to do and see in the world.
The key is to listen to that inner voice. It won't be quiet anyway, but some of us got really good. So I actually going to play this tape for my own kids because I have hope for them that they just won't go through like the normal channels. If there's something in them that is calling them in a different direction, I want them to have the confidence to do it.
That's amazing.
So Ian, you totally get this, right? From the little bit that I know about your background, and you've had like a whole lot of diverse experiences that you did follow your inner voice into all sorts of interesting paths. So tell us a little bit about like your background and like how it comes together in the work that you do.
Sure. Yeah. I grew up in a family of musicians and computer scientists, so it was pretty much a match made in heaven for and I just so happened to be interested in both of the different things. Not all my brothers and sisters were that. I just was the one who was and had the abilities and tools to start networking computers when I was really little. My dad was able to show me that, and I was able to set up our internet and set up everything in the house and give everyone access to the computer and the internet, and just became obsessed and lived on the internet. And a lot of I relate a lot to what you're saying about not really, and I don't know if that's everyone in grade school and stuff, but I just didn't vibe with these people. But when I'd go on the internet, I could talk to these people, and I felt the sense of community that I didn't feel even in my own surroundings. But then on the other side of that was music, and when I discovered how to express myself through music, it changed everything too about who I am and what I started to tap into that, who I am, what do I want, and that started to become louder and louder and louder and louder as I was getting older. And then when the time came to start releasing music, I was obsessed with reading all these articles about these corporate monopolies of the music industry, and I wasn't happy with the music on the radio, and starting to dive into the internet allowed me to access this music that I had no idea existed, that I resonated with so deeply. And so to me, when I figured out what I wanted to do, I didn't even see a path in this corporate way. Like most musicians just go up if they're in your bedroom, you have no idea where to even go, where to even look, what to even do. So to me, I had these communities, I had this understanding of using an open source technology, using these ways to build with each other, these communities that are able to grow together in this open source mentality. And it just was this kind of second nature to me, be like, oh, I'm just going to release all my music open source. I'm going to release every single mixer track of every single song and let people use it as much as they want. And it was something interesting that you said in your talk about building relationships that's if you're defining your success by building relationships, but not only that, but investing in other people's. And so to me, when I have filmmakers that come to me and they say, thank you so much for music to use, I've been able to create this piece of art that I am so happy with, but the only way I could have made it was using your music. To me, that is the most fulfilling moments in my life, when these people have these connections and when I connect with these people. And so once that actually started running, and then once those relationships started to build, and I started, like I said, it started to get louder and louder and louder, and it was, so then I decided to leave the software job that I was working on, where I was, writing software for a refrigerator company. It's just like, okay, I like refrigerators, but not that much. Like I'm really grateful for refrigerators. Like, don't get me wrong, but building web apps for companies, for luxury fridges is not the most fulfilling for me. What was screaming inside of me was, no, pursue the things that make those connections. Yeah. And so it's very exciting and very like reaffirming to know that this has happened and this is possible, and this stuff can actually affect people in a positive way, and then can maybe even turn around and help me to help other people again, and then it's just this whole cycle of...
So two things that you're both clearly really passionate about, Ron. One is sort of your inner voice and the courage to pursue what you're interested in, and allowing that voice to come forward out into the world. Two, connecting with other people. And I love what you said, which is, Chris, your theme around investing in other people as well, which is at some way foundations or pillars around open source, right? But for those who may not be like totally familiar with that phrase, maybe Chris, why don't you give us your definition of open source, and then Ian, I'll have you build on that.
Yeah, I mean, open source largely comes out of like the software development world, and what it was largely, actually the computer industry itself started out in a very sort of free-form kind of way of sharing lots of things. I mean, you can imagine that prior to Microsoft, in a lot of ways, software was almost developed more like jazz, where people who were like, sometimes they were hobbyists, sometimes they were like, working for like an IBM or something during the day, they would come home and they would like hack on this stuff because they were so excited about what was going on. And they realized that they could move much faster as a group of people as opposed to an individual. There's some proverb about moving fast or moving slow but together and going farther. And so I think open source was very much about that. And also it was just very tedious to write a lot of the software earlier. It was really inefficient. And so sharing code was a way of actually taking the work that someone else had done, and they had proactively put it out there in the world with the permission that other people could use it and then build upon it. And there was kind of like, I would say, a code or a philosophy or part of the culture to then share back that work that you had built upon it back to the community at large. And that was the economics of it. So what the internet unlocks really is an economics of abundance, which is in contrast to an economics of scarcity, which is what the Industrial Revolution was largely built to address. So you go into the world of software, and you can share your work for free, put it out there, or you can put a certain license on it, which basically says, well, I want people to be able to use this, but for these purposes. Yeah. And there's also what's called like a viral license, which means that if you're going to use my work, then you have to share your work in the same way that I shared mine. Okay. There's an aspect of this around copyright called Creative Commons, and it was about articulating a different set of rights that you want to give people downstream from you to be able to build upon your work to create culture. That was like the whole point. So very much like what you were saying was kind of, I think you were following in like the footsteps of like the open source like movement, the open source world, and the validation that you do get from other people using your work or contributing to your work is so much the reward of it. And it's very different than a world which exists around proprietary ideas or software, where you're creating property out of things which are previously abundant or infinite. I mean, the fact that you can trademark an idea is a government way of giving an individual the right to own the use of an idea.
Right.
or a patent for that matter.
Yeah,
right?
and by definition, it almost feels like it's limited because you've defined sort of what the outcome or the use is. So I think with open source, you have to be willing to say, I don't know what the ultimate purpose or the use is, but I'm willing to go through the journey, and I'll contribute a little, others will contribute a little, and sort of like collectively we'll see where we end up going. You have to be, I guess, the abundance mindset, right?
Well, it's also generative, right? In the sense
Yeah.
that you don't know how things are going to turn out.
Yeah.
And so you're building small, simple, what in music might be called like stems that can be built upon for other people to create new types of interpretations. So if you
Right.
think about like remixes, like musical remixes,
Yeah.
those are taking like a core idea or an expression
Yeah.
and then layering on or building other parts or subtracting parts. And so software is the same sort of, idea.
Yeah.
And I basically took that idea and applied it to behavior, saying here's an event that is a derivative of the open space model where people just show up and make a schedule.
Yep.
And here are some other structures that we're going to layer on to address some of the shortcomings of that event model. Or here's a co-working space, which is kind of a mashup of like a coffee shop and like your home, where you feel very comfortable, or whatever, but there's actually community that's built into that. And so we're trying to create a space that brings people together.
Yeah.
And the hashtag was also a similar idea where it drew from a number of different things that were in the environment that were relevant at the time.
Yeah.
That therefore made it easier for people to relate to understand, to use, without asking them to learn too much. And then they could adopt those ideas to their own context, their own community,
Yeah.
their own situation.
Yeah, I love it. I wish there was like more of that in the business sector. But so Ian, what would you build off of that, or how does open source look in your music?
Sure. Yeah. You mentioned Creative Commons, and that was pretty much the pinnacle of when I realized that this is possible, and there are people who have thought of this before. And Lawrence Lessig would start diving down all of what he's done, and it opened my world to what was possible. And then I started to join some small communities of Creative Commons and to see that whole idea of how people can relate with each other. But I think the idea that I had too was that I grew up listening to a lot of hip-hop sample-based music, and so you're talking about controlling these ideas and controlling these concepts, and the big legal issue with that is controlling these recorded versions of things. But before you could record things, songs were just songs, and unless you're a big name composer and you're writing operas and stuff, most folk music is just shared. No one knew who wrote half. You go listen to all of these old songs before a certain time period, it just says traditional or it's a standard or something. So people didn't own music and this expression the way they do now. That's almost a pretty new concept in society. So this idea of Creative Commons and knowing the advent of hip hop and how the music that I resonated with so deeply and loved so much was all a combination and little sample bits of it's already kind of these ideas being reused and moving forward. So to me, it was almost a natural trajectory for how artists can collaborate, and you can collaborate across generations and across the world and across all these different concepts. And the open source, to me, I didn't really think the ideas of Creative and Commons and stuff was just kind of a second nature, because I did grow up in this software world, whereas not many musicians kind of grew up in that. But I think that more people can and should embrace these ideas because there are so many people that they can work with.
Right.
The number one thing I hear from filmmakers constantly is I can't find good music that I can put in, that I have to jump through all these licensing hoops, sign up for these strange websites that who knows where and it's all stock music that's not made with passion at all. It's made for these licensing. It's made to be regurgitated and put in and out and thrown away. And so there's a huge need for collaboration across media, and the more film and game, there's a huge presence of esports and gaming here, and that's been I love gaming, but it's kind of an eye opener to really like be witness to a lot of that around in this conference. There is my music's been in games as well, like Car Mechanic Simulator 2016, like that. But people come to me like, oh, I heard you in Car Mechanic Simulator, man. I feel like, wow, Hell yeah, that game's
So let me
great.
ask a practical question, because I love the philosophy, but from just like a business and a sustainability standpoint, like you guys, in order for you to contribute more, you got to make a living, right? So Ian, you give a lot of music away for free. You might give all your music away for free. And Chris, clearly when you talk about the hashtag, you had the opportunity to sell it if you wanted to, but you believe so deeply. How do you reconcile just being able to make a living doing what you love to contribute to the world, but then this concept of open source and it's all free for others to build off of? How do you make it work in your job?
You got more expertise there?
Well, I mean, it is one of those things again where there's this. Yeah, it's hard because on the one hand, obviously, you give things away. You're unable to put a gate, which can be like a token gate where someone has to pay you to like use it, which is the licensing thing. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if your goal is to change or affect culture, or to have the validation of someone using your work for purposes that you could never even have imagined because you figured out some riff or you figured out some little linguistic hack that gives people the ability to express things that they didn't even know that they weren't knowing how to express, that in itself is a different type of currency that we don't really value in the world. And there's so many things that we don't value in the world or know how to value in the world that it isn't sufficient to say that you're not getting paid if you're not getting paid in like dollars and cents. Now, that said, as you're alluding to, you still have to like pay for a place to live, and you still have to like buy your food unless you're going to be a thief or whatever, and that's not a viable way to work given the laws. And so therefore you can basically do work for hire where either because I'm a product designer, people will come to me and they're like, oh, like I want to build some social software for this very specific purpose or for this niche audience or that operates in this new way. Can you come in and bring your approach or bring your perspective or your experience doing this before into our context? And so essentially you start to get paid for like all of the failures that you've had and all the lessons that you've learned. Mm-hmm. They're paying for your experience. They're paying for your perspective. Yeah. So that can be consulting. That can be, I've started an AI company and raised money for that. So, and I've also like worked at Google and Uber, and I've gone into places where I've helped and worked on their developer strategy and their developer platforms. Mm-hmm. So part of it is finding those contexts where you might not do that work like naturally. Yeah. Like, I'm not just like gonna like give my work away necessarily to Google for free. Yeah. But if there's some alignment, some way in which my goals and the things that I'm trying to achieve in the world are aligned with, in that case it was Google, then yeah, it makes sense to like get a job and to do that.
So I think I kind of see how it comes together. So you put it out there, open source concept, you allow others to build off of, but in the process of doing that, you get a lot of just good like experience and learnings. Yeah. That's of value, so people now want to pay for your experience.
Part of it is like putting it out there so that you get the sense that people will pay for it. Because if you're making stuff that isn't any good, or because you're afraid of putting it out there because you think it's not good enough, or you're restricting it to because you think it's so valuable, you're actually like kind of missing the point. Because again, in an age of abundance, it's hard to like the amount of energy and effort it takes to restrict access to things, especially in this like networked economy. You must be an enormous company in order to do that. Yeah. To like shut things down and to like prevent access. Yeah. It's interesting to think about like if you use like stickers or GIFs on like Instagram. Like I don't know what the license is for all that content. Yeah. I know that like Giphy has an amazing business because they're the ones providing that stuff and they're probably doing like the licensing work or whatever. Yeah. But so much of creative culture now, we just take an assumption that we can just use whatever is out there. Right. And you go to like Google Images, like you use this here, like maybe there's a license on it, maybe there's not. It's sort of like we treat the digital content that's out there in a very similar way to the way that we treat kind of like those like terms of service, like checkboxes. It's like it's there and you're sort of aware of it, but like unless like you're really going to make a lot of money in that other world, which is all the licensing world, then it doesn't really like apply to you. Yeah. So if you just sort of like lean into that and you put your work out there and it's iterative and it's constantly being developed and like the freshest stuff is the stuff that people either have to pay for or maybe it's the back archive, like more and more like Patreon, like people like that, or even like news agencies are charging for access to like historical content, and they're giving away the stuff that's in the free. So, like the stuff that's like present. In a way, it's like a kind of like lead gen, but it's also sort of like content production. Yeah. And it's sharing your perspective and sharing what you can do. And the worst thing I think nowadays on the internet is like people can't find you, they can't see your work, they don't know what you're capable of. They're gonna go to one of like the stock sites, because it's like more reliable even if it's not as good. Yeah. So part of it is actually building your own reputation by making it
Right.
yourself.
Yeah, which Ian, you've really done. So tell us a little bit about like how do you actually make a sustainable living as a musician, but you're still adhering to like open source philosophy.
Luckily, the Creative Commons is fringe pretty much, and when it comes to most intellectual property in general, like when I give things in a Creative Commons license, it doesn't restrict me also from giving it in a different license. So it does if you're going to do exclusive contracts or something, at least in the music industry, you can still give these non-exclusive contracts licensed into these big publishing houses, and they could still sell it, and you could still make money on it. You can still stream it on Spotify. You can still monetize on YouTube. You can still do all these things, but also give it for free. Like, people can go to my website or other Creative Commons hubs, and they can download it using those licenses. But the people that are going to use that are going to be the people that need free music or that are looking for that. The people who are in the more establishment of the industry, the big music industry, they don't even want to deal with that. And that's one thing I've learned is that I used to put a thing on my website, it's like, if you want to pay, like, just send me an email. And it would just be these back and forth, and I'd be like trying to negotiate things. It was just nonsense. But they didn't want the Creative Commons. That wasn't what they want. They want a receipt and they want a license, and that's the thing.
Well, I mean, you have to understand, like, the risk model and the creativity model are different in these contexts, right? So if you're a big studio, the last thing that you want is to use something that someone claims ownership of, and then sues you, and because you have a lot of money, they want to come in and take a lot of whatever it is that they own, right? Whereas in your case, you're like, well, I just want you to use it to, like, build something cool, and if it's cool, then, like, we'll work out a deal or something.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's like a different, like, the things that you care about are more about the work even being seen and being used. I assume. I don't mean to speak for you, but, like, that's my sense. And so I mean, the hashtag was the same way, right? Like, if I had tried to lock it down in the early days, and I mean, some people have done this where they, make it open and free, and then they do a bait and switch, and then they, like, change the license later, and then everyone gets angry, and then, it depends on what kind of a jerk you are. And a lot of people end up losing a lot of, like, friends, and maybe they make some money, and they, live in their chateaus by themselves, and then they die a sad life, and that's, their deal. But, like, I think in our case, like, when you come from this internet culture, there is a lot more of a sense of just, like, sharing and mutuality. And the way in which you can live with yourself and live with others seems to be of a higher order than owning all the things and feeling like you've succeeded by taking stuff away from other people. And so...
And it's almost like establishment industries are distrustful of that. Like, why would you? Like, there's almost like, no, we'll just pay you because you can't be serious.
They're playing a different game. And their success is very different. They're looking at, the numbers of zeros at the ends of, like, their returns or whatever. And yeah, they're affecting culture and change. But, I was thinking about, like, the movie industry, they will find a formula and then they'll replay that formula over and over again. This is what Charles Adler was talking about yesterday from Kickstarter, where it's like, how many Die Hard movies can there be? How many sequels should there be? It's like you found a formula, sure, but how much creativity is really actually happening in that context? And so they're looking at maximizing returns as opposed to maximizing, enjoyment or the flourishing of individual creativity and expression.
Yeah. Interesting. So, where do you guys see sort of the future then of open source philosophy? Are there any areas, sectors, industries where you see it chipping away at and really changing, sort of the fundamentals, how the industry works? Or is there an area where you wish you could make more inroads, or we'd benefit a lot more if there was more of a shared experience around open source? What are kind of like your hopes around open source going forward?
Yeah, that's really tough to say because I don't know. There's so many forces at play, and everyone. I would like to see a world where everyone could share everything, but there are so many forcing functions against that. Like you're saying, how do you even make a living? I think until you change the culture, I think that's what you were talking about. Until you change the culture, then it's tough to say even where it's going to go. Because I don't know. I would like for everyone to be able to share the music, and then I could work with other musicians, and we could remix each other's things, and then we can cross promote, and we could do all this work together, and you could create a platform for that, even where you could do that, and then have everyone participate, and I don't see why you couldn't do that in film or or in any creative sense, visual arts, or you're seeing it across the across industries and together, people are more focused on their community and stuff. And I think when you have the open source mentality, community is built in.
Yeah.
And that's actually a huge advantage to people who embrace the open source mentality, because it depends on community almost. At least in software and stuff, if you want to grow it and you want people to participate, you have to be one of the main theses of why you do it is for the community.
Yeah.
And so I think when people are drifting more and more apart, and there are more antisocial problems, and people are getting lost in Instagram feeds and stuff, and not, people don't want to talk to each other or as much anymore. To get people to come together is probably, I think this might be a natural reaction. But I might not have a thumb on the scale, or I might not have a reading of what is going to happen, but I can hope for that.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm trying to do. You're saying trying to be the change, trying to let people know this is possible at least. Like, so right now that's like my focus is just to be like, all right, I want to be able to prove this is possible as a musician, prove you can be open source. Not many people even open up the stems, but when they do and they send me something, it's fantastic. And if everyone was able to collaborate together like that, but there are just so many forces against it right now. So I don't. It's hard for me to envision it, maybe, other than maybe a dream, or maybe if I could extrapolate from my own experiences and say, well, now that everyone can have these same experiences. But I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what you say.
I think one of the things that you're alluding to is this. It seems like a burgeoning kind of like collab culture, like especially in Instagram. However, the outcomes are largely seem to be around like followers or influence or likes and things like that. These sort of like metrics. Like that's the game that sort of social media is predicated on now, as opposed to, let's say, creative output or cultural output or generating. I don't know what kind of solutions people might want, but I think if you look at like Kickstarter as a place where people go to take cultural ideas and then get funding to then produce those ideas in the real world, those are different types of like collaborative contexts. So one of the things that I think is interesting about what you're saying that the open source software world has solved for are to create a set of relatively straightforward and simple licenses that describe the permissions that the creators want to offer second or third or X generation of people who are going to use these things down the road. And if there was more of that, where you could facilitate the ability to work out an agreement between a set of people about the ways in which they would like their work or support their work being used, that also then can ultimately benefit them perhaps down the road. And then this question of putting your work out there in the open, like for free, doesn't have to become a part of it. You can say, if you would like to use this work and you make money from it, then I would like to get 5% of that or something.
Yeah.
And I'm not a huge blockchain fan, but like at least conceptually, there are technologies that are starting to be developed that are using that model, where if you can track something in commerce and you can see the number of times that it's been bought and sold, then each time it's bought and sold downstream, you may get a fractional, penny or something.
Yeah.
It's similar to the way that Spotify works. So if you put your music or your content on Spotify, every time someone listens to it, you don't get the person's full list Spotify membership fees, but you get a portion of it. And so in a similar way, if every time someone used your stems, you got like some residual check, sort of like universal basic creative income or something, like that might be a way of helping people to feel more free to just create their work and put it out there. And if it does get used, then they're automatically seeing a check show up.
Right.
And so there are experiments in that world like kind of happening, but it's still, because we still live in this scarcity-minded world where the legal system is set up in that way, it's, I think, hard for people to take that risk and to go down that path. And so it really
but
does
what you
require
described
individuals to
seems
do
like a nice kind of like middle ground, or at least a way to maybe ease a little bit closer to open source mindset
like
than what we are today.
Right? It's more about having choices.
Yeah.
It's more about recognizing that, copywriting your work, keeping it all to yourself, keeping it secret or private is the only way to, try to like have some big break where then your work gets bought by some big company and you make a ton of money, because it's unlikely to happen. On the flip side, giving away all your work such that you have no income and you're destitute and poor, that clearly also doesn't work, because your human body still needs calories, and so you have to put money in. So I think knowing that there's a flexible set of solutions,
right,
but those solutions are still not user-friendly enough for the vast majority of people who are creative people, is where there's an opportunity. And Creative Commons sought to make the legal system more enabling of individual creators to have a choice, as opposed to having a big company come in and say, well, this is the contract and you're going to sign it, and you're like, I can't even read this, and it's going to cost me more money in legal fees to get someone to explain it to me than the contract's even worth.
Yeah.
And so there's this huge imbalance that exists in the marketplace that really shouldn't. And I think that would be at least where I hope this could go next. It's interesting now, you also asked about where some of this open source stuff is happening. And actually in the world of AI, a lot of people are publishing their research papers very publicly and very openly. They're sharing what's happening there. So that's why the world of open source, AI seems to be moving so fast. Is that researchers are actually being paid by these big companies, and they're putting their research out there. And they're in the academic world, which is really all about, glory and about validation through peer
and grants.
review and grants, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to publish to get your grants. So that's a different game where the incentives are actually aligned with creating and publishing.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because it's almost like what's the infrastructure, the incentives that we need to build around this, almost to support some of this more sharing that helps to move the ideas further, right?
Totally.
You have to be really thoughtful about it. Guys, I could keep going on and on. This is fascinating to me.
Amazing.
Really. It is. It really is fascinating to me, but at a certain point we got
You got to let go of the process.
Yeah, I know, but it's really fascinating. Well, all I can say is thank you for what you do. Keep doing it, because you're going to help to get the rest of us more engaged in this and ultimately contributing to it. And I guess the concept of it all, we don't exactly know where it's going, but you guys are leading the way with just the passion that you have around this, which is really evident and very clear. So thank you so much for being my guest. This is a great way to end my portion of the Fall X. This is awesome. Thanks, guys. I learned a lot. Thank you,
so
Chris.
much.
Thank you, Ian.